Here's Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
It's so simple.
Roll out.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for March 16th, 2025. I am Brendan Cassidy, and for those who follow my co-host JD Duran on social media, you'll know that he's in Disney World with his lovely family this weekend having a grand old time. Honestly, just seeing the sheer joy on his son Andrew's face, who just turned 2 years old this weekend, it's enough to make you smile. It has actually been a great weekend for birthdays as well, not just for JD's son, but both my sister and mother-in-law are celebrating their birthdays today as well as we're recording this, so wishing them much love today as well. And speaking of wishing some love, let's also do the same for our guest on today's episode. You've seen his written work here at InSessionFilm.com, as well as various other outlets such as FilmSpeak and the Cosmic Circus. Max Vincent, welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks for having me. It's not my birthday, but happy birthday to all involved on March 16th.
I thought it was your birthday. That's the only reason why I decided to have you on for this one. Oh, absolute failure. But no, seriously, it's really exciting to have you back. Last time we had you on was for Kinds of Kindness, the Yorgos Lanthimos film. And after that conversation, we knew we had to have you back for another discussion on some type of auteur filmmaker of sorts. I feel like that just seemed to make the most sense coming off the heels of someone like Yorgos Lanthimos, which now brings us to the great Steven Soderbergh, whose new film, Black Bag, will be the basis of this conversation we're about to have. Let's talk about Steven Soderbergh first, Max. Before we get into Black Bag, let's talk about him specifically. I want to know your relationship with this filmmaker and your thoughts on him. Now, this is a director that JD and I have discussed quite heavily and very favorably on the show before, but I wanted to give you the floor to start things off here.
All right. Well, I guess it's pretty much self-explanatory. Soderbergh is the GOAT.
I love that photo of yours.
He is the undefeated king of independent cinema. I will defend all of his movies, even the ones that I'm a little, I would say, mixed over, like Haywire.
Okay.
I think all of his movies are either from just okay to fucking incredible. He's not made a single lousy motion picture, in my view, that I've seen. I've not seen all of his work, but I've seen, I would say, about 90% of what he's made.
I have to ask you something now. Have you seen The Laundromat?
Yes.
Oh, okay, and that's one you still think is okay?
It's fine.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I don't share that opinion, but it's at least interesting. Okay, I'll say this. It's at least interesting.
He's a great formalist. He knows how to shoot impeccable images. He reinvents himself with every single movie he makes. Every time I think, oh, I guess I've seen most of what he's done, I know what he's going to do, he does something like Presence, which is totally different from everything else he's done before. And then, okay, I guess his next motion picture is going to be a spy thriller set in the UK with Michael Fassbender and Cate Blanchett 2 months after his last film came out. Why not? And it's incredible. And no, he's really great. I have a great admiration for Soderbergh's work. I think, he understands that cinema needs to evolve all the time in order to enthrall audiences, because if you just do the same thing over and over and over again, it may be fun, but at some point, it kind of grows stale. And he's never, even works that people don't necessarily resonate with, he always does something interesting with the camera. He always does something interesting with how he edits his films, because I think he edits most, if not all of his films. Same thing with the cinematography. He's the one that's even operating the camera. So he's got a clear-cut vision, and he always executes it, in my opinion, at the highest level, even if sometimes the scripts that he worked with can be a little inconsistent. This is not one of them, though. This is a brilliant script. Soderbergh's the GOAT. He's the man. Every time I go see a movie, I'm so excited, because most of his movies that came out since COVID were direct-to-streaming efforts for that. And now, since Magic Mike's Last Dance, we've been getting, a theatrical Soderbergh film. I did not think this day would come, and I did not think that I would ever see a spy thriller of this level by Soderbergh, and it's incredible. So yes, I'm a big fan. I'm a big Soderbergh fan. So.
That's a nice transition into Black Bag. But before we get into that one, I just want to agree with everything that you're saying. I feel like when we look at maybe the definition of indie director, Steven Soderbergh is he's probably the most cited example of that, because he kind of, I guess, spearheaded the movement of what indie cinema could ultimately be. It's always existed, but he sort of created like a basis of how we compare indie filmmakers to each other.
Yeah.
And it's really intriguing. He's always experimenting. He's always surprising. He's always trying to challenge himself as well.
Yeah.
And that's why I say that even movies of his I don't really care for, they're at least interesting. And I like filmmakers that can do that.
And I think, the reason why he came out of retirement as well, because he retired for a brief period, is also to encourage people like aspiring filmmakers to, shoot and use their imagination as much as they can with the limited means that they have. That's why he used iPhones for Unsane and High Flying Bird. That's why also Presence used a very cheap Sony camera that you can buy off on Amazon. He just wants to show people that, hey, it's possible to do something really great with very limited means. And by doing that, I think will encourage the next generation into wanting to create and not, create artificial intelligence junk that's being released.
You're jumping the gun a little bit of something I was just about to say there, because this week we're also going to have a review on the podcast of The Electric State.
Oh yeah.
Which is kind of the exact opposite of this, right?
Yeah.
You have a filmmaker like Steven Soderbergh who has these limited means, but he still makes movies that feel kind of grand and cinematic. Like he doesn't misconstrue limited means with limited releases, right? Or like maybe limited releases isn't the right word, but straight to streaming is like a more condensed release of sorts. He doesn't conflate those things. He understands that there is a key difference there, and I love how he's able to do that and understand that. So we're going to have some positive things to say about this movie here, which might not be the same when we get to The Electric State later on this week. Let's transition over to Black Bag. We've talked about Steven Soderbergh a lot. It is his latest film, already his second film this year after Presence. Maybe we'll get a third. Maybe we'll be lucky. He might be 3.
Here's hoping. Fingers crossed.
I know he's working on something called The Christophers. I don't know what stage that's in yet. I think it's still in pre-production, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll see if we get that this year, but I wouldn't be surprised if we do. You also mentioned this as well, Max, that the film is, or at least not this film, but Soderbergh in general tends to work as his own cinematographer as well as his own editor. He usually works under different pseudonyms for those roles, and he does the same thing here with Black Bag. The man can do it all. He absolutely can do it all. And I also want to highlight with Black Bag, the film is written by David Koepp, marking his third collaboration with Steven Soderbergh, I believe, between Presence earlier this year and then Kimi. And as far as I'm concerned, I want that partnership to continue. I talked about that when JD and I reviewed Presence. I'm kind of liking this partnership here. Now, with regard to Black Bag, the film does star Michael Fassbender, Cate Blanchett, Tom Bjork, Marissa Abella, Regé-Jean Page, Naomi Harris, and Pierce Brosnan. What a great cast, if I do say so myself. And it tells the story of intelligence agents George and Catherine Woodhouse. And when Catherine is suspected of betraying their nation, her husband George faces the ultimate test of whether to be loyal to his marriage or his country. So let's talk about this film. Max, you already kind of alluded to this, that you really did like this one. So why don't you articulate why? You were very adamant about coming on this particular review for this particular movie. So let's hear about it.
Well, I would preface to say that I did not like this movie. I loved it.
Okay, good. Thanks for that correction on me. By the way.
I think it is one of Soderbergh's very best, but then again, I think most of Soderbergh's films are some of his very best. I think he's operating at a way different level than he did in Presence, where in Presence it was more of a technical exercise in which he used a very again cheap camera to follow, I guess, a ghost that's careening around a house. Yeah, and it was quite compelling. But I thought this was way more engrossing, way more thrilling, surprisingly sexy as well in many aspects. The score by David Holmes, who's a frequent collaborator of Soderbergh, I think is his best since the Ocean's trilogy.
Absolutely rips. It rips.
It's so good. It adds a really unique rhythm to the proceedings that are just incredible. Cate Blanchett and Michael Fassbender, 2 of the best performances of their respective career. Especially, Cate Blanchett has been on after Tar, she did Borderlands, which
does that count?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's in her filmography, but it's probably the most embarrassing thing she has done. in her
Admittedly, I haven't
career.
even seen it yet, so I don't know if I can speak to that.
I saw it a day later. I tested positive for COVID. That should tell
Oh
you
gosh.
exactly how.
So we can
how
blame the
bad
movie
it
for
is.
that.
Yeah. I'm really happy that she was able to, I guess, come back from this disaster by starring in this
Mhm.
film.
Sure.
Here's the thing. I love how Soderbergh shoots and edits his movies. And,
Yeah.
the movie opens with this one shot of, Michael Fassbender coming out outside from a bar. It reminded
Yep.
me a lot of Goodfellas, I think.
Sure.
The
Yeah.
tracking shot from Goodfellas. I thought that was nice. And the extreme close-ups on the characters' faces inform us so much of what this conflict is, what is going on in the movie. I found it really, really, really compelling. And I think it's one of Soderbergh's best. I would say one of Soderbergh's post-retirement best, if we want to leave it at that, because
Yeah.
he did retire for some time and then he came back and he just, he's working. He's making
Yeah,
one
he's
movie after
working.
the next. And I listen, whatever he's doing, I'll be there day one. I'll sit down in front of the theater, or like Kimmy was an HBO Max movie.
Yeah.
That was another great one, but I think this is probably his best post-retirement effort. It's also
Yeah.
the best movie I saw this year as well.
Yeah. I think that's very fair. I think he's done 10 movies post-retirement or something like that.
Let's
Maybe a little
go.
bit less than that. I
Let's
forget
go.
the exact number. It feels like he was only retired for a few months, but it was a few years, and then I think he came back with Logan Lucky, if I'm not mistaken. I think
Well, he
it's,
came back to do the cinematography for Magic Mike XXL, and
yeah.
then directed Logan Lucky.
Which, in a way, I know he didn't technically direct Magic Mike XXL, but his blueprint, his directorial blueprint is all over that movie.
Oh yeah,
I know,
yeah.
like one of his frequent collaborating producers was actually the director of Magic Mike XXL. I think Greg Jacobs, if I'm not mistaken about his name. But it does feel very Soderbergh-like when you look at his sensibilities and what that particular film has. So in a way, I almost feel like I'm tempted to qualify that one as part of his filmography post-retirement. I think this might be his best as well post-retirement. It's interesting that I think his two best movies that he has done since claiming retirement, probably this and Presence, the two films from this year, they might be my two favorites actually. I think this is awesome. It's so slick, it's so cool. It really takes me back to the Soderbergh of films like Out of Sight and Ocean's 11 and Logan Lucky as well. Yet it's also nothing like those films as well. It carries Soderbergh's trademark experimental minimalism, I guess you can call it that. It's kind of sits in this weird middle space between the Soderbergh of today and his more commercial sensibilities, which makes the film feel both fresh and nostalgic, and I absolutely love that. So it's a very entertaining movie for those reasons as well. The thing I also want to highlight, because we can talk about Soderbergh all day if we want to, but I also want to highlight David Koepp's screenplay, which really surprised me at how great it was. Koepp is a writer that I've always liked for his efficiency and his tactility. He's someone that knows how to get around a plot very smoothly, but I don't know if I would always call his scripts to be the most artful or nuanced or even thematic. But I think this might be his best work as a writer. At the very least, I'm trying to think of what else he's written that might compete with this. Maybe Carlito's Way, maybe Mission Impossible, which I know he worked alongside Robert Towne on, so it was more of a co-writing effort. But with Black Bag specifically, I mean, he's clearly taking inspiration from Edward Albee's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, particularly in those two dinner sequences that bookend the movie, and I'm sure we'll have more to say about those. But apparently Koepp also consulted with real-life spies and agents in order to best capture how their jobs might actually be. And there is a level of perceived or felt authenticity here that you just don't often get with more traditional spy films. And I like that about it. This almost feels like if James Bond were combined with, I don't know, Office Space or something like that. Tonally, maybe not the right comparison, but more situationally, I guess, is the comparison I'm trying to make. But that's just so interesting. And I like what this film is going for. So I'm absolutely with you. I love this one quite a bit.
I think what's interesting is that, it's once we understand what the conflict is about and what the implications of that is, it's fairly large in scale, but Soderbergh's aesthetic keeps it very intimate. We're always very, very, very close to the protagonists. And I think we're following George more than the other characters of the movie. But at some point, we also begin to suspect him, like we suspect everyone that
Mhm.
they may or may not be as trustworthy narrators as
Yeah.
they were initially positioned to be. And I found that quite intriguing. And in terms of the screenplay, I think this is his best Soderbergh collaboration for sure,
Mhm.
and possibly his best in a very long time. I'm looking at his filmography on
Yeah.
Wikipedia right now, and yikes! That's all I'm gonna say.
He's a strange writer, right? He's a
Yeah,
very strange writer.
yeah. There's a lot of really. I mean, he directed Mordecai as well, so it's been
Oh,
some
I
time since
forgot
he.
about that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I sometimes forget that David Koepp has also directed a few films, and some of them are not bad. Like Stir of Echoes with Kevin Bacon, I think he
yeah.
directed and wrote. That's actually a decent thriller.
Then he also did You Should Have Left, which was terrible. So yeah, it's been some
He
time since he's done something really really great. And I think
Mhm.
this Presence and Kimmy are among his very best for sure in a
Yeah.
very long time. So
Well, yeah, and something I talked about when JD and I reviewed Presence was that somehow this partnership, this collaboration is able to highlight the best attributes of each individual person, and I think that's why I love these scripts so much by David Koepp, because Steven Soderbergh is tapping into the right things, and emphasizing the right things. That's why these films feel more thematically and emotionally complex when compared to, let's say, I don't know, Premium Rush, for instance, which is a very entertaining movie, but not at the same nuanced level that you get with something
yeah,
like Black Bag or even Presence. And I found that very surprising, especially given David Koepp's overall track record. I love the way you called this sort of a uh, sort of this uh, like unreliable narrator
yeah.
exploration of sorts. Because you're right, we are following George as our main character. Michael Fassbender is really the star of this movie, even more so than anyone else, even if it's kind of marketed as a Michael Fassbender Kate Blanchett partnership. But
It's more of an ensemble piece, but yeah,
it's definitely an ensemble piece, but it does feel as if, like, if this were to ever be campaigned at awards season, I feel like Michael Fassbender would be the lead in many ways, because he is the most primary narrator that we're following. And you're right, there are times it seems as though we as the audience are even questioning his own allegiance of what he's going to do. And the film's very aware of that. It's very aware of questioning those dynamics, because I think that's ultimately part of the fun, but it's also part of the thematic point that I'm sure we'll talk about as well. I just found that so intriguing.
yeah, no, definitely. I think it's one of it, the entire movie I think hinges upon how good the script is.
Hmm.
But someone can even not pay attention to any of the dialogues, can watch the whole thing on mute and
Hmm.
extract a lot of meaning from just how Soderbergh shoots and edits the film.
Oh yeah,
It's just incredible.
there's
Yeah.
a lot of there's a lot of gesturing happening
Yeah.
here that almost feels like it's like it almost feels like it's part of the script, even if it's not being spoken. And while there is a lot of spoken dialogue here, I actually think the dialogue is really biting and really quite
Yeah.
great, and more so than most of any other David Koepp's work in the past. But there's a lot of movement here that tells its own story. A lot of varying facial expressions that also help articulate things. And I love a director that's able to tell stories in that way as well. And there's a lot of that going on, which I think plays into the into the questioning that we have as the audience as to who we should be trusting and who we shouldn't. And what I do like about the film, we're not going to get into spoilers. I want this to be as much of a surprise for anyone going into it. I really hope people do see it. I wouldn't say where the film ends up going is all that surprising. I feel like it's something that you could ultimately pick up on, but the way it's executed and the way it's communicated, I found really fresh and intriguing in the why of it all and who's playing who and why that ultimately is. Even though I could have predicted where some of it was going, and while I did feel like I picked up on the general outcome that it was suggesting, I still feel like there are things I may have missed. Like there's a lot of puzzling happening here, and I can't wait to go and see the film again to try to uncover what differences that I may have missed the first time and how everything connects together. It feels like it's one of those movies where everything is meant to connect together, but you might be missing a few things on first go around, which makes the film endlessly rewatchable, I think.
I think there's oh, am I muted?
No, you're good.
Okay. Sorry. I think it's really interesting to see also how, if you rewatch the movie, it'll be more rewarding than if you initially watch the film. Because when you watch the film at the first time, the Soderbergh kind of forces you to, be locked in and trying to figure out exactly who's playing who. But
Mhm.
once you know exactly, what happens, you can rewatch it and now look at, some of the finer details that could potentially, influence you in thinking, oh, okay, maybe I can see what Soderbergh's doing and making
Mhm.
us point one way or another way to make us believe that this person is playing this person or that person's playing that person.
Mhm.
And try to see how he structures his film and how he edits it as well. I
Yeah,
think it's
there
incredible.
are a lot of red herrings here in
Yeah,
the
for sure.
tactility of it,
Yeah.
but they don't feel like red herrings. And a lot of mystery movies or whodunits, if you want to compare these to that, a lot of those red herrings feel very purposely placed to trip us up. But these feel kind of organic, like they actually feel like they are natural to the momentum of the film, which is really smart writing and smart directing and just smart storytelling in general. That's why I love this partnership between David Koepp and Steven Soderbergh quite a bit. I want them to work together more. I really do. And I think they will. I ultimately think that they will. I also love what this film is getting at, perhaps emotionally and thematically. This is ultimately why I made the quote unquote Office Space comparison. This is nothing like Office Space. Like don't take me on that one. But it is a very corporate look at MI6 in many ways. It's not the extravagance or the action set piece heavy version that we've normally seen in other movies like this. It's not Mission Impossible. It's not James Bond. But I love what it might be suggesting by keeping things a bit more intimate, what it might be suggesting about how corporate life in general interferes with your married life, especially when you also happen to work with your spouse. There's a lot of things that this brings up, and I just find it so interesting and symbolic as well that they choose to portray that notion in a world where we are working with classified information, because we often talk about keeping those lives separated, your home life and your work life. And the idea of quote unquote black bagging the thing that you work on at work that you don't bring on at home, I do find to be a very relevant notion. And by bringing this to the world of, let's say, MI6, it adds a symbolic layer to it that is, I think, rather smart. I think it handles that very well. So it's not just that this movie is fun and slick and cool. It is all of those things. But I think it has more under the hood. And I think the way it concludes, it kind of suggests that this potential, like, I don't want to say mistrust, but that this potential game that comes with this sort of role, these sort of jobs, almost kind of works as like this, like sexual awakening for people as well. It's something that to put it bluntly, it's something that people might get off on, and that does seem to be part of the thing that Soderbergh is playing with at the end, which is why the film is very sexy for sure. But I think it's also about that sexiness. I found that really cool too.
I mean, there are no action scenes in the movie. I think
Right.
the biggest action scene that comes close to resembling a set piece is one explosion at some point. A car blows up.
Oh, and it's also muted as well,
yeah.
which is really interesting.
Yeah, and so like the action for me is how Soderbergh shoots and cuts his film, because that gives a certain rhythm, a certain sense of tension that grows, especially during this incredible polygraph sequence. How it's how it's edited, particularly where we see the close up shot of, I guess, the lines of the polygraph where he's George is trying to figure out exactly who's lying or who's basically tricking the machine. I found out to be, and of course, dialogue's very funny in that scene. I was actually surprised at how funny this movie was, because it keeps a rather serious tone for most of the film, especially in its atmosphere and its dialogues as well. They're a little serious. The music as well gives the movies some seriousness to it. It's some serious notes, and then the dialogues themselves at some point are extremely funny, and I was surprised at how much I was laughing at it too.
Oh, it's very clever. It's very quirky at times too.
And I think that's also Soderbergh's sense of humor, because sometimes in his movies it could be very dry and it could be very funny, especially in one of his last movies, Magic Mike's Last Dance. It also has a very specific sense of humor throughout that I resonated with. I know a lot of people don't like this movie. I think it's fantastic. But
that's great. Yeah, I was mixed on it, but there's a lot of things about it that I did like, and I appreciate some elements of it too.
Yeah, so I think this movie falls very much in line with what he did in the past, and specifically in terms of creating a sense of tension and action with no action, but with how he decides to create this rhythm through how he edits the film. And I think it's I think it's
yeah.
marvelous. Whatever. It's like it's a great movie.
Oh yeah, and there are individual scenes where they almost feel like they have the intensity of an action
Yeah.
scene, but there
Yeah.
is no action. You're
I mean,
absolutely right.
both dinner table conversations are exactly
I was
that.
just gonna mention that the dinner scenes that bookend the movie. And you could really sense the inspiration taken from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. It has that same kind of quality to it, but there is an edge to it. There's an intensity to it. You are on the edge of your seat. It's maybe the few moments where the film does turn more into a thriller, but it still doesn't lose its predetermined identity of still having some slickness and some coolness and some sexiness as well. Everything is also tonally balanced and intertwined effortlessly. But I do love how there is still an action of a sort with how those sequences are played out alongside the polygraph scene that you mentioned. Maybe the other scene that also qualifies is when George, and I'm blanking on her name, that's Clarissa, played by Marissa Abella. There's
the character's name is Clarissa, but the actress's name is Marissa.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think she's terrific in the movie as well. I we'll talk about maybe some of these performances at the end. But the scene between Clarissa and George is also kind of an action scene of a sort. Like it does kind of have that's the closest that maybe this comes to mirroring other espionage films that it's certainly inspired by. And it is a very thrilling sequence. There is, without getting too heavily into spoilers, there's a moment of error, I'll simply say. And when that moment happens, like my heart kind of stopped for a moment. It really is effective. I just love the way this is executed.
That's Soderbergh for you. He's the GOAT.
Yeah, it is picture for a reason. I love that.
No, not really. It's that scene in particular is amazing. And Marissa Abella is probably the biggest standout of the whole thing. I wasn't too familiar with her. I know she was in Industry, I think, TV show.
Yeah, she was also Amy Winehouse.
Winehouse movie, which I did not watch and I will not watch. So.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either. The general consensus I heard about that movie is it's not good, but she's not bad in it.
Yeah, well, I'm sure she did the best she could, but I refuse to watch that movie for very obvious reasons.
Yeah, I don't blame you. But yeah, she's terrific here. And that's what I was going to ask you next. If there was a standout in the cast that you wanted to highlight, I think everyone here is terrific. I don't necessarily think there's never really a weak link in many of Soderbergh's films. He knows how to get the best out of everyone. He is the most tactile and efficient filmmaker in the indie sphere, I feel like. But I do think Marissa Abella is perhaps the most surprising, the most introductory in many ways. And I found that really exciting because she really does hold her own in a very cocky and sneer way when being questioned and governed by these veteran actors that she's working alongside. And these are all great actors that have recognition in other ways outside of just this film in particular. Marissa Abella is kind of the odd woman out in some ways because she doesn't have the career that defines these other actors. And like it's almost like she saw that as a challenge and that inspired her to do her best work that she could. And she really does stand out for the right reasons.
And what better way to really break out in film than, being in a Steven Soderbergh film, and not just in a Steven Soderbergh movie, in a damn great Steven Soderbergh film. I also want to point out Pierce Brosnan in the film, because you mentioned James Bond, and obviously he was one of the James Bond, but they don't put him in a spy situation, like in the sort of classic spy archetype. He's pretty much the M, if you will, of the whole operation. But even then, at some point, you start questioning if he's
a very loose M.
With very, very morally gray areas. I think it's very interesting to see him in this specific role. And I think, that's also part of Soderbergh's desire to, I guess, reinvent or deconstruct familiar tropes of the espionage film genre. Let's cast a veteran spy film actor that everyone knows and loves. Because a lot of people will tell you that Brosnan's one of the best Bonds, but let's put him in a completely different role than what most people expect. And let him have fun with it as well.
This might be Pierce Brosnan's best Bond film.
Yeah,
maybe. well, I think you make a great point that Steven Soderbergh is trying to deconstruct the typical archetypes of these movies, because not only did he cast Pierce Brosnan, who was at one point James Bond, The movie also features an actress who was in James Bond.
That's right. Yeah,
Naomi
Naomi Harris. Yeah.
Yeah, not in the same universe
Nope.
as Pierce Brosnan, but she's been in James Bond movies before as Moneypenny in the Craig era. You also have a man who auditioned for James Bond and didn't get it, Michael Fassbender. He lost out to Daniel Craig, I believe. And then you also have an actor who has been commonly theorized and speculated as a potential new James Bond in Regé-Jean Page. So, like, this movie is clearly playing with the
And he
James
was in
Bond trope.
the Gray Man also, I think, with
yeah. Gosh, I forgot about that. There's a reason I forgot about that movie. Don't steal my
that
thunder.
movie is this sort of espionage thriller, globe-trotting action thriller, which most James Bond movies were, which he travels around the globe. That movie is also that. So there's a loose connection there.
There's a loose connection. The big difference is one's actually good. Very simple, loose connection there. But I do think the casting here is kind of deliberate. I do feel like it's almost as if the movie is commenting on its existence as a spy espionage like movie. I do wonder. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I actually don't wonder, because I feel like whenever a movie like this is made on a low budget, but maybe doesn't make the money that it's hoping for, Hollywood tends to learn the wrong lessons from it. Because I do almost feel like if Amazon is watching, and if this movie were to be as successful as it should be, maybe they'll take some lessons of the coolness of this one for their new direction in James Bond. Because this, in some ways, like, if you were to call this a Bond film, it's one of the best Bond films, I think. At least as of late, it certainly rivals some of the best ones, but for different reasons. It's a very different type of film, very deconstructionist, as we've been saying. But it does have the slickness and the coolness that you still want to see in a movie like a James Bond movie. Like, it's not avoiding those tropes. It's doing two things simultaneously, which I think is very difficult. It's deconstructing those tropes while also playing a part within those tropes. That's very difficult for any filmmaker to pull off. It's having it both ways, and this movie does that very well.
I mean, if there's one person that can do both, it's Soderbergh. 110%.
Well, as we mentioned, cinematographer, editor, director, sometimes writer,
and having a clear-cut vision at the very beginning is also very helpful. And as I've mentioned, he's not just a cinematographer; he's a camera operator.
Yeah,
he knows where to position his camera. He knows when to move it, because a lot of filmmakers don't know when to move a camera. Sometimes they move it in a sort of overtly flashy way, but the way that the camera moves, especially, there's one specific moment, I forget where it was, but I think they're having breakfast, and at some point George is suspecting Catherine of lying, and the camera sort of moves towards him. And I was like, "Oh shit!" Like,
it's really
the situation itself is intensifying, and just by these deliberate choices, you're feeling the tension build up.
There are little nuances that Soderbergh knows how to orchestrate from his cast. There's also how the camera is able to pick up on these things. One of my favorite moments, and I had to write this down so I didn't forget it. It takes place at a movie theater when George and Catherine are they're seeing what is clearly a horror movie. And there's a shot where everyone in the theater jumps at some jump scare, and Catherine doesn't jump. So then George looks at her, and then that's when she jumps, because she knows that he's watching her. And even George says that's the basis of our relationship. Like, she knows I'm watching her. I know she's watching me. That's how we make it work. And that's another sort of thematic idea of this film. And this is something that I think David Koepp has even talked about when consulting with real life spies and agents, that one of the hardest things they have to contend with is how they maintain a life, and a romantic life specifically, outside of this particular work environment. How difficult that is, because this is a job that's all about not telling the other person anything, and how complex that must be when both of them actually work for the same organization. And that plays into that very idea, and how hard that is. And you feel that. I think you also feel that because of Marissa Abella's performance. I think she, in many ways, is sort of the strongest argument for that thematic idea. I love that interrogation scene of a sort between her and George in her kitchen. I think is very effective and also very moving as well. There's a lot of dramatic intensity to that one too. I don't know if we've made it clear, Max. We love this movie. So,
I don't think we made it clear enough.
I don't think we did. We can just keep saying it. I don't know if we have anything else to say about Black Bag in particular, but I did want to ask you, with regard to Steven Soderbergh, this might be a bit too early of an ask, because sometimes we like to let really good movies sit within a director's filmography before we say something definitive here. How does this stack up with some of his other great films? Like, if you were to do a very off the cuff, I guess like top 10 or something like that? Or I guess my first question, is that even possible for you? Am I setting you up for failure right now?
No, it's not possible. It's like some people, and I don't want to throw shade at some other critics, but like I've seen some social media reactions when the film, I guess, was screening for press in its earlier stages, where people were like, Soderbergh's back. I'm like, well,
he never went anywhere.
Just like made him. This is his second movie in 2 months, but it's not like he's back because he's made a string of lousy movies.
Right.
Like it's not like a return to form for Soderbergh. No,
it's not. It is maybe the most familiar a newer film of his has been to his older stuff, and I get it from that sentiment. But the wording is not articulating that very well.
No, it's like Soderbergh's back. Well, he never left. Well, he did leave for when he retired, but then when he came back, now he was back.
Yeah, exactly.
When he made Logan Lucky, and Logan Lucky was a great statement of hey, I'm back. I'm here making great movies again. And then his next film after that was Unsane, and that was completely different. He shot with an iPhone. Different textures with digital cameras. So no, I don't think I can objectively rate all of Soderbergh's films that I've seen in a well-mounted worst to best list. But I will say that out of his most recent movies, it's definitely, for me, above Logan Lucky and Kimmy.
I'm with you there. Like I said, I think I mentioned this in my opening thoughts, or at least earlier in this conversation. I think my two favorite films of his post-retirement announcement are the two from this year, Black Bag and Presence, and for very different reasons. Presence definitely carries more of the formal experimentalism that he's known for, but it's also a very moving film. That's a very emotional experiment as well, and I think he taps into that really intriguingly. But I think these might be my two favorites of his, at least in this current era. I'm with you. I don't think I could do an off-the-cuff ranking of how these two films in particular fit within his filmography. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up in my top 10 of his as I marinate on them more. My favorites are still movies like Out of Sight and Ocean's 11, and maybe even Aaron Brockovich. I think that's actually a pretty underrated movie. It doesn't get talked about nearly as enough as some of these others. And I also think Ocean's 12 absolutely rules. That is a weird movie. That is maybe the first ever time we really took notice that Steven Soderbergh is kind of this deconstructionist of sorts. But we weren't ready to, I guess, admit that at the time.
I think what's cool about Ocean's 12 is that people think after Ocean's 11, everybody loved that movie. They're like, we want more. And then Soderbergh's like, okay, I'm going to give you more, but I'm not going to give you what you want.
I mean, many people
and a lot of people were not happy about
No,
movie.
I wasn't happy when I first saw it. I just didn't get it. And I can't be the one to claim this comparison, but a lot of people have mentioned that Ocean's 12 is basically a French New Wave film.
Yeah.
It's very much in the vein of like Godard's Breathless in many ways. And very much inspired by that kind of sensibility. And I've learned to appreciate that movie a lot because of how different that it feels. But I think it actually works because of those differences now. Like those four films I just mentioned might be my Mount Rushmore for Soderbergh at this present moment. That could change tomorrow. That could change as I see Black Bag and Presence again. I don't know. But he's got a string of great movies that I just can't ignore. This guy's done it all.
Yeah, no, he's the GOAT. And just one thing about Ocean's 12, I think the best scene of the movie is where we flash back to Catherine Zeta-Jones meeting Brad Pitt's character. How he captures the electricity of romance in that scene is very few filmmakers can do what he does. Yeah. And how he does it also in Black Bag, and making us feel for both characters, George and Catherine, how deeply romantic they are, even if one suspects the other, and perhaps vice versa. It's unmatched. His aesthetic sensibilities remain unmatched. He is the absolute, and I'm going to pull my phone again. He's the absolute king.
Yeah. For those listening on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify who aren't watching us on YouTube, Max is holding up his iPhone and has, I guess it's an iPhone. I don't know if that is.
It's a Google Pixel phone.
It's a Google Pixel. Okay. Thank you for correcting me. But whatever. His cell phone has a very clear background image of Steven Soderbergh. as the goat, as literally the goat.
as the king. He's got
Yeah,
a king
as the
hat.
king. Just goes to show how much of a fanboy he is as well as me. I share those sentiments as well. I love this conversation on Black Bag. Hopefully everyone listening gets a chance to check it out. I want to see this one do well. It is really quite excellent. And I think that should close things out here for this conversation. But before we go, Max, thanks again for being here, man. Really do appreciate this one.
Of course. Thank you for having me once again. It was a lot of fun, and hopefully we'll do this again very soon.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Before we get out of here, though, why don't you tell everyone listening where we can find you online and some of the great work that you're doing, not just at In Session Film, but in the various outlets that you work on.
Yes, so you can find me on all social media at the same handle, Max from Quebec, so it's not that complicated. Just
Yeah.
put that on Google and you'll find all the social media accounts with the same handle.
Mhm.
As for things that I'm working on, well, I just posted a review, not on In Session Film, though, for The Electric State. And I saw this. I saw this movie on the big screen, which few people will get that chance.
It was allowed to play in the big screen.
Well, there was a promotional screening in my area, and I went to it.
Okay.
And let's just say it was not very good. That's the nicest thing I'll say about this movie.
I feel like the most boring conversation this week about movies is The Electric State was not that good.
$320 million. It's incredible. Talk about Black Bag, $50 million price tag. It looks like, it looks like, a massive, large scale blockbuster because Steven Soderbergh knows how to shoot movies while the Russos have this exorbitant amount of money. And
and that might as well be our review of The Electric State. We will have a review of that coming out this week, but I mean, might as well just clip that particular segment that Max said and just use that as the basis of our review.
Yeah, basically. So also I have a review on In Session Film for Novocaine with
nice.
Jack Quaid, which I did not like.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
Basically, go see Black Bag. If there's one movie to watch right now in cinemas, it's Black Bag. Mickey 17, I didn't love, but Black Bag is where you want to be.
Basically, Black Bag is so good, it makes every other movie in theaters right now so bad. We just don't want them to see it. We want everyone to just go and see Black Bag. Is essentially the conspiracy theory you can derive from this.
Yeah.
I love all the work that you're doing, not just at In Session Film, but everywhere else. All your written work is really clever. I really love your writing and really appreciate you being on for this particular episode. Hopefully we'll get you back on very soon, maybe for another auteur director, or if Soderbergh makes the third film that comes out this year.
Let's go.
Yeah, we'll prioritize you as the guest here. So thanks again for being here, Max. Really do appreciate it. And for those of you listening, if you agree or disagree with what we just had to say, you can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. We're available on all those platforms. And you can also email us at insessionfilm@gmail.com. I'll once again reiterate, we will have a review of The Electric State this week. Might be a very short review. We'll see about that. We haven't recorded it yet. But I'm curious how that conversation is going to go. I feel like most of the conversation will be more around the circumstances of how it was budgeted as opposed to the film itself.
The money laundering scheme.
It's a Ponzi scheme for sure. There's a lot we could talk about there. But as for the main show, even more exciting, on episode 628, JD and I will be continuing our 1960s Best Picture series with the 1963 film Tom Jones. We will also be doing a ranking of what we're calling the best director 1 year double features. Basically, if you want to know what that means, it's very much what Steven Soderbergh did this year. He had 2 films this year. He's not the only one to do that. There are almost 20 filmmakers over the past many decades who have done the same thing. And we're going to maybe do like a top 10 of what we think those double features are, which will be a lot of fun. Look out for that. Really looking forward to it. Max, thanks again for being here, man. Really do appreciate it. And for those of you listening, we'll see y'all next time on the In Session Film Podcast.